Well, hey everybody, we're so excited to have Colleen Giles Harris on from Pet Sitters Associates to talk all about insuring your pet business. A huge topic and a really important one at that. So Colleen, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, Colin. Thank you so much for having me here today. Like I said, my name is Colleen Giles Harris, and I am the underwriter and manager of the insurance program for the Pet Sitters Associates group. So members who join the association, if they've got real specific insurance questions or if they have a claim and they want to chat about it, I'm the one that's on the other end of the line. And then I work with the association to make sure that we have the proper coverages for the members and that the pricing is appropriate for the program as a whole.
Yeah, the perfect person we need to be talking to about pet insurance.
Yeah, so, such an exciting topic.
it's just really important and one that needs to be talked about more often. So right at the top here, what is the difference between insurance and bonding? Because that's something that gets confused an awful lot.
A great question. And both the term insurance and the term bonding kind of are all encompassing in a lot of ways. Insurance, when you're talking about a pet sitting business, you're talking about a commercial general liability policy, or CGL for short. And a CGL policy is going to provide coverage for a variety of things, but the most important things are bodily injury and property damage caused by the business. And with a pet sitting business, of course, it's also going to cover injuries to the client animals and injuries caused by the client animals. So that's the insurance part of it. Bonding also is a variety of different things. A lot of times people are looking for a dishonesty bond, which is something that you can get through typically through an independent insurance agent. You're normally going to have to do a background check, and typically it's going to require a conviction before it steps in to provide coverage for the theft by the owner of the business or by the employees. Or you get something kind of what we have through Pet Sitters Associates. We call it the broadened property damage coverage and bond. I know that's a mouthful, but I don't know if we could have made that name any longer. But the broadened property damage coverage and bond provides coverage for theft, breakage, and mysterious disappearance of the personal property of the pet owner up to $10,000. Ours is different because we're not going to cover the owner of the business. We're not giving the member carte blanche to go, rob their client. But if they have an employee or an independent contractor or an incidental helper, and they were to steal from the client, we would provide up to $10,000 of coverage for the items that were stolen. We do not require a conviction, which is a big thing. We also would cover if a third-party person broke into the house and stole something due to the negligence of the pet sitter. So if they negligently left the front door unlocked and the house was robbed. We also provide coverage for breakage, which is different than the traditional bond. And we actually see a lot more claims on the breakage side than on the theft side. You knock over a vase, you go to turn the TV on for background noise and it falls off the wall. We're going to cover that kind of breakage up to $10,000, and that's a really special thing you get through PSA.
Wow. So when people are listening to that and maybe they have questions right now of going, gosh, what is covered? What's not covered? What's one of the easiest ways someone could find that out?
Well, the easiest way for Pet Sitters Associates is to go to the website, sure. Which is petsitllc.com. There's a lot of great information on the insurance options page as well as the FAQ page. But if you're not a member of Pet Sitters Associates, it's going to come down to reading your insurance policy or asking your agent. As a general answer, there's going to be common exclusions that are going to be in all CGL policies like war and terrorism or sexual abuse and molestation, pollution. There's standard exclusions. When you're looking at the pet sitting business, the main things that we're going to exclude are injuries to the pet sitter. That's going to be more like a workers' compensation type policy. If you do have employees, you might be able to get a workers' comp policy through an independent insurance agent in your area. Typically, work comp is not available for the owners of the business or for independent contractors, but we get a lot of questions on that. If you do get injured by a client pet in your care, my suggestion would be to ask the owner of the pet to submit a claim under their homeowners or renters policy. That's going to be a good outlet for you of potential help if you do get bit by a client dog. We also are not going to provide coverage for injuries to the pet sitter's dog. And the reason for that is that the pets are considered property. I know you and I, of course, consider our pets to be members of the family, but legally they're considered property. And I know it sounds so cold. I hate saying it and I hate talking about it in that way, but in the grand scheme of things, the law says that's their property. So when a client dog injures the personal dog of a pet sitter, it's in essence damaging the personal property of the pet sitter. We're not going to cover that.
Sure.
We're also not going to cover any of their other personal properties. So if the pet sitter brings the client dog back into their house and they have the proper coverage for a pet daycare or a boarding policy at their house, we're not going to cover their property. Basically, we're just extending the liability insurance to cover a claim that might happen at their house, but we're not going to cover if the client dog chews up their couch. Because again, the property damage is really for third-party persons.
Right. So walk us through some of the benefits of being part of an association like Pet Sitters Associates.
The main thing, obviously, is access to the insurance program, and it's typically be a lot less expensive than if you go through like an independent insurance agent in your neighborhood. I love independent insurance agents. They're great, and they can write you a specialized policy that's going to do just what you need for your business. But typically, they're going to be stuck dealing with minimum premiums, which makes insurance so expensive. By joining an association, all of the members are on one insurance policy. So we don't have to worry about policy minimum premiums. There's just a rate that we give each person that helps the cost go down. And then secondarily, typically in an association, we can offer some special coverages that maybe you couldn't get through a traditional policy. For example, Pet Sitters Associates provides coverage for lost keys, up to $2,000 per occurrence. So let's say you're walking a dog and you've got the client's keys strapped to your belt buckle and they fall off somewhere on the walk. And now the owners are worried because there are keys floating around out there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So our policy would cover the rekeying of the client home, again, up to $2,000. Also a unique coverage that we have is what we call our veterinarian expense coverage. So there's two portions of our policy that provide coverage for injuries to client pets. The first portion we call the veterinarian expense coverage, and that provides up to $1,000 of coverage for injuries to a client animal, regardless of negligence or legal liability on the part of a pet sitter. And that's a really special coverage because normally insurance doesn't kick in unless you're negligent or legally liable. So a traditional insurance policy would not provide that $1,000 of coverage. Our second portion of the policy provides up to $15,000 of coverage per occurrence for injuries to or loss of an animal in your care. But for that higher coverage to come into play, there must be some negligence or legal liability on the part of the pet sitter. And I know it sounds really weird that you get more insurance if you're negligent, but like I said, typically insurance only covers you if you are negligent and therefore legally liable. So that's how it's kind of that extra coverage there, that $1,000 is something special you get through an association. Sure. A good example of when that might come into play, and we actually just had a claim like this come across my desk earlier last week. A pet sitter was walking a client dog down the sidewalk and a stray dog came running out of nowhere and attacked the client dog. The pet sitter didn't do anything wrong, and there's nothing that she could have done differently to have prevented that claim. And the liability should really fall on the owner of the dog that was loose. But in this case, and sadly in a lot of cases, the dog attacked or ran off. No one knows who owns that dog. It might have been a stray. We have no idea. We have no way of finding out who should be responsible for those bills. Right. So typical insurance policy is not going to cover anything because there's no negligence, right? Our policy is going to step in and provide up to $1,000 of coverage. And maybe that's not going to be enough for all of the bills, but it's something that we can do to help out the clients in that situation, even though technically the pet sitter was not legally responsible to help pay.
Sure. Now, you mentioned some specialized policies there, but what about special services like daycares, grooming? Do they need additional coverages?
Great question. And absolutely. So with Pet Sitters Associates, we have a basic membership that's $190. And that provides coverage for one person as an individual pet sitter going into clients' houses, feeding the dogs and cats, taking the dog for a walk, going to the dog park, etc., staying overnight at the client's home. All of that's a traditional pet sitter in my mind, or a dog walker. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be offering services like grooming or training or house sitting, or most common, the pet daycare or boarding operations, you do have to add those on for an additional cost on an a la carte basis. Some policies and some insurance policies and some associations, some of those might be included automatically. But we at Pet Sitters Associates decided that we wanted to have it a very a la carte, kind of build your own policy, because every pet sitting business is very different. Everyone's got a different budget, and not everyone offers the same kind of services. So we add a little bit more premium for all the additional services that you might want to offer.
Yeah, and I know something that's been increasing in popularity are things like pet taxis. So would that be something to be added on top of that?
Actually, our pet taxi coverage is automatically covered in that 190. We do limit it though to 200-mile radius. You know, we're not looking at doing like the cross-country pet transporters. That's a little outside of the realm of our program. We thought like 200 miles. I mean, that's going to take them to a vet surgeon. My dog tore her ACL last week, and we have to bring her up about 90 minutes away for a surgeon. So I could technically hire a pet taxi. They would bring her there and whatnot. But of course, you know, I'm taking my baby myself.
Understood. And hope she gets better really soon.
Thank you.
So thinking about some misconceptions people have about insurance, why do some people think that they don't need it?
I think the biggest thing is that small pet sitting businesses in particular feel like they don't have a real exposure. Me as a pet sitter here, I only take care of my friends and family's pets, right? They're never going to sue me. They understand if something were to happen, they're going to forgive me. They're my uncle, or I've been friends with them forever. Nothing bad's going to happen, right? And that might be the case. Perhaps your friend is going to forgive you if something happens to their dog and not expect that you pay. But if it's bad enough and the bills are big enough, like a torn ACL, that's $5,000. So, you know, your friendship might really be strayed if you can't help them out. Or even worse, let's say that client pet, your friend's dog, now bites a third-party person out on the sidewalk. That person is going to sue you. They're going to sue the pet owner. They're going to sue everybody that they can find to sue, because that's sadly the world we live in. So you've got to have coverage to protect yourself because you have some liability with that pet being in your care. We actually just recently paid last year, about 9 months ago, we paid a large claim that had been in court for a long time, where a pet sitter was walking a client dog, and a lady walked on the sidewalk. The dog jumped up in excitement. I don't think the dog even made contact with her, but she was startled and she fell over and she hit her head. And there was brain damage, really serious injuries, missed work for a long time. And after all of the court stuff, it ended up paying out over $800,000. So there's the situations where it seems like, wow. That person was probably really, really grateful that they had purchased insurance.
Yeah, absolutely, because you just never know what kind of things are going to come up like that. So
exactly.
that may be one of the bigger ones, but let's talk about some more common types of claims that you see typically.
Absolutely. The most common claims are the smaller ones. We see a lot of breakage claims from that broadened property damage coverage and bonds that I mentioned. That is an optional coverage that people have to add on. It's an extra $100, but we do see quite a few breakage claims. We also see quite a few small animal injury claims. You know, a dog steps on a piece of glass while out on a walk, or they pick up something and they eat it on a walk, or they get into a small scuffle at the dog park. We see a lot of claims in that, you know, few $100s to few $1,000s range. When it comes to animal injuries, you know, I think the biggest ones we've seen are the $10,000, $20,000, because those are pretty serious surgeries at that point, you know, if it's getting that big.
Yeah.
If the animal actually dies, and it's kind of going back to what we talked about before, the fact that they're considered property, if an animal actually dies in the pet sitter's care, we look at the replacement cost of the pet. And I know that sounds awful because you can't replace them, but again, they're property, right? So I'll use my own dog as an example. I paid $350 to adopt her from a foster home. I have put lots of money into her and more money to come, but the insurance company would say that I could go and get another dog of like kind and quality for $350. If you have a dog that's of higher value, like my sister has a more expensive fancy yellow lab who's not any cuter than my dog, by the way. It's some fancy dog. So she can say, hey, my dog cost more, it came from a special breeder, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need to have like really in-depth documentation, but you just need to be able to say, this is the cost it would be to get another dog that is similar to the one that was lost.
Right. While we're on this claims discussion here, walk us through a typical claims process. What does that look like from the business owner's perspective?
So obviously it's going to be different with every insurance company, but with Pet Sitters Associates, we try to make that really, really easy. When you join the association, you create a username and password for the member login section of the website. And from there, you can make changes to your membership. You can review old newsletters. You can read the insurance policy if you want. That's all in the member login section. But there's a place in there where you can submit a claim. You just click on the little link, answer maybe like 4 or 5 questions, and then that is sent into the claims department at my office, who takes that and a copy of the member certificate and sends it into the insurance company. Once it's sent into the insurance company, typically within 24 to 48 hours, a claims adjuster is assigned, and he or she will then reach out to the member to get more information, to get copies of receipts and invoices and all that kind of good stuff. To get the claim initially going, you really don't need more than the date of the incident, the name and phone number of the owner of the dog that was involved, and a brief description. You don't need invoices or anything like that. I am going to take this opportunity to say something that I always like to remind people when it comes to claims. A pet sitter should never make a payment on a claim unless it is a true emergency and the owner is not around. So let's say the owner's on a cruise in Europe. So this is obviously hypothetically years from now. The person's on a cruise and they can't get a hold of them. So there's nobody to call and say, hey, Fluffy needs to go to the vet. The pet sitter has to take the dog to the vet, and we know that the vet is not going to care for the dog if you don't pay. Okay, it's fine to go ahead and pay what you've got to pay. But if their client has a credit card on file, or they are reachable and they can give a credit card over the phone, or if it's just a daily dog walking visit and they're in town still, we always want the pet owner to pay whenever possible. The reason for that is there's this thing in insurance called voluntary payments. And if an insured member makes a voluntary payment on something when it's not an emergency, it can be construed in certain courts that you're admitting negligence. And it can cause a lot of problems with the claims. And in some states, like California, voluntary payments can actually make the insurance company have to deny the claim, even if there would be coverage. So it's very important. You only want to pay if there's a true emergency, and you have to pay to get the vet to take care of the dog, or the locksmith thing too. That's another one where you usually got to pay the locksmith right then and there, and that's fine. But you always want to keep that in mind whenever you have a claim.
Sure. Always those little things to think about that can have larger implications down the road.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about some of the smaller claims now. Let's talk about some of the biggest claims that you've seen come through.
It's kind of like a car wreck. You just can't look away from the big claims. So obviously the big one that I mentioned earlier, the $800,000 one, that was a huge one. We've had other big claims. There usually are bodily injury type situations where we had a pet sitter who was walking a dog, and the dog bit somebody on the sidewalk. And we found out during the claims investigation that the owners had told the pet sitter that the dog had a history of aggression. The pet sitter didn't pay attention to it. So it ended up being a bit larger because of the specifics of it. But then what makes it worse is that pet sitter was walking that same dog again several months later, and the dog bit again. And now there was a double liability attached to it. So not all states have that, but a lot of states do, where the second time a dog knowingly bites, there's double liability. So even if the medical bills are only $50,000, it's automatically $100,000 because it's sort of like a punitive punishment for the fact that you knowingly kept dealing with a dog that was aggressive.
Right.
And so in the case of that claim, the second claim ended up being about $600,000 because it was a pretty bad claim anyway, and then it doubled the liability. So sometimes weird little legal things come into play. I should preface this by I am not a lawyer. No, don't ask me legal advice, but
No.
those kind of things come into play sometimes. We've also seen some larger claims with flooding situations where a toilet overflowed or they left the sink running. We're not going to cover flooding or a fire if it's due to electrical or a plumbing issue, but if it's due to the negligence of the pet sitter, they left the sink running, or with the toilet clogging, they had been told not to use that bathroom, to only use the other one, and they forgot, and they went and they used the bathroom that was broken. And the flooding of the individual house or apartment is bad enough, but if it's an apartment or a condo and now it goes into the one below, those can also be very large. And I think, we've had some flooding claims that have been multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. So weird little things that happen.
Yeah, but you have to try and be prepared for them, right? That's the whole point of having insurance. Would also love to get your thoughts on off-leash dog parks and off-leash beaches.
Right. Yeah, I get that a lot. I mean, it's definitely one of those questions that people are real sensitive about, because people who like off-leash dog parks and beaches love them. And of course, nobody ever thinks anything's going to happen with their dog. And I like them too. My dog loves to go swimming, so we go off-leash all the time at our little park. Our policy is fine with it. I would recommend to any pet sitters who are not members of Pet Sitters Associates that you just check your agent to make sure that it's not going to be a problem that they're off-leash. One thing with Pet Sitters Associates is we have a $500 off-leash deductible. The only deductible on our policy is the $500 off-leash deductible, and that only comes into play when an animal is voluntarily released from its leash outside of the fenced yard of the pet owner or the pet sitter if the pet daycare and boarding coverage is purchased. And that's a really special thing too, because that's the only time there's a deductible. So if you have a small claim where you accidentally gave a client cat too much insulin, you got to take it to the vet, or a dog, like I said, stepped on a piece of glass, and those are only going to be a couple $100s. Some insurance policies are going to have a $250 or a $500 or even a $1,000 deductible that's just across the board.
Right.
So you're not even going to submit those little claims in because it's under your deductible. But our policy for Pet Sitters Associates, only if the dog is voluntarily released from its leash.
Okay, well, something really important then to know and to look at and ask serious questions if that's something you're interested in doing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So do you have any suggestions for pet sitters just starting out in their business when it comes to insurance?
Well, obviously insurance is number one. Make sure that you've got the proper coverage in place. You do a little due diligence, look around a little bit. If you have friends who are pet sitters or dog walkers, see what they recommend. Everyone's on social media these days, so check out Facebook pages and that kind of stuff. Outside of Pet Sitters Associates, there are other associations that offer similar coverages, and they're good. I certainly can't say anything negative about any of them. Everyone offers something a little bit different, sometimes a little bit more expensive, sometimes the limit's a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but there's a variety of ones. Outside of associations, if you go to an independent insurance agent, it's probably a little bit more expensive. You're probably going to have a deductible across the board, some of those kind of things, but obviously a lot of options there too. Or if you don't fit an association guidelines, like Pet Sitters Associates for the dog daycares and boarding operations, we only allow 10 dogs during the day or 5 overnight. We're not looking at covering large kennels. So if you're a large kenneling operation and you just don't fit an association, your best option is to go to an independent insurance agent. And then my recommendation to you would be just make sure that you not only have a commercial general liability policy, but that you also have coverage for the animals that are in your care, custody, or control, or we call that CCC for short, or sometimes it's called Bailey's coverage. So good insurance agents can do that automatically. But if I were giving a tip to a friend, I would say, hey, make sure that not only do you have the CGL, but that you've got the CCC for the client animals. That's really important. Outside of insurance, I would recommend that you check with your local government to see what kind of licensing might be required. Every city, county, and state is going to be different. Some require licensing, some don't. Some dog parks require that you have insurance to bring your dog there as a pet sitter. So I would look into those kind of things. You also might want to contact a local attorney to put together a contract or a waiver. even with insurance, I do highly recommend contracts and waivers because I'm not an attorney. I can't give you advice on that.
Sure.
But you want to make sure that you're looking for things in your contract that everyone understands the expectations of everybody else. Very important there, and that they understand that there's no coverage under your insurance policy for injuries to you as the pet sitter. Those kind of things might be good to put into a contract. And if you don't want to spend the money on a lawyer, you might want to see if your area has a small business bureau. Some small business bureaus offer either free legal advice or discounted legal advice to small businesses, so that could be an option for you as well.
Sure. Yeah, it really sounds like just doing some basic research about your options, looking at what's going to fit best for you, and then reaching out and asking questions to make sure that you're getting the best possible fit for your business and your services is a really good path that people could be going down.
Absolutely. And I would tell everybody, asking questions is number one. I guarantee you there's no stupid question that I haven't heard before. So I'm not going to say there's no stupid questions, but there's none that I haven't heard before. So don't hesitate to ask them. And for Pet Sitters Associates, if you reach out on the phone or the email, your initial contact is going to be Elizabeth. She is their office manager. She's fantastic. She can answer most general questions. If there's questions on things like how to join or how to make a change to your membership, Elizabeth can do that. If you have a real specific insurance question, then she's going to refer you over to me and she'll give you my contact information. But she's a great resource to start off with.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Now, thank you for all of this wonderful information. It has been been really interesting to get to learn about that, and just to know that the options are out there, and to really make sure that you have the coverage that you think you have, and if not, start asking those questions. So, if people want to find out more, if people who are attending the summit want to find out more and get more information from you, how can they best do that?
The Pet Sitters Associates website is PetSitLLC, all one word, .com. So PetSitLLC.com. Their office hours are 11 to 3 Central Time. And if you want to talk to somebody, Elizabeth is typically available. And their phone number is, I have it written down so I wouldn't forget, it is 855-737-1598. Again, that's typically 11 to 3 Central Time. To get started with PSA, it's super, super easy. We try to make everything really user-friendly. Just go to the website, click on the Apply Now tab, fill out the application. It's just basically your name and address and phone number. Select the optional coverages that you want to purchase. So if you're going to do a pet daycare, you want to make sure you purchase that. If you want the broadened property damage coverage and bond, you want to make sure you check that. So check the boxes of what you want for your membership. During that process, you'll create a username and password. And then you can pay with a credit card at the end of it. And your coverage is effective at the date and time of purchase. So if your pet sitting business is going to start tomorrow, you can log on today. It'll be effective today. It's a year-long policy. And then you can make changes. I think I mentioned that earlier. But let's say right now, when you're starting off your business, you're just doing traditional pet sitting. But a couple months down the road, you want to start doing a dog daycare, or you want to start doing some grooming. You just log in and you add that coverage, and then it's effective for the rest of your membership term. So it's pretty slick and easy. And Pet Sitters Associates is offering a discount right now. So anybody who is listening to this podcast, the discount code is SSS2020. Again, that's SSS2020. And it will save you $10 on your Pet Sitters membership, which is awesome. And that is active until the end of the year.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much again, Colleen, for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Colin. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.